Elijah Carter was a man of quiet resilience and boundless kindness, living in the small, weathered town of Mill Creek. Tall and solidly built, with hands calloused from years of hard work, Elijah carried himself with a quiet dignity. His deep brown eyes seemed to see into the hearts of others, understanding their struggles even when they hid them. Yet, in a town steeped in its own troubles and prejudices, Elijah's kindness often went unnoticed, or worse, unappreciated. Every morning, Elijah rose with the sun, stepping into a day where his good deeds would likely be met with indifference. On most days, he walked into town, stopping along the way to help wherever he was needed. Mrs. Green, the frail widow who lived at the edge of the neighborhood, relied on him to fix her broken fence. Elijah worked silently under the hot sun, sweating and toiling without complaint. When he was done, she offered a weak thank you, barely looking at him as she shut her door. At the local store, Elijah often spotted young Marcus, a boy teetering on the edge of trouble. One afternoon, he caught Marcus sneaking a loaf of bread under his jacket. Instead of calling him out, Elijah quietly paid for the bread and handed it to the boy. "You don't have to steal," Elijah said gently. "If you need help, you just ask." But Marcus's father, when he found out, wasn't grateful. "I don't need no charity from you," the man grumbled, slamming the door in Elijah's face. The town struggles. Mill Creek wasn't the bustling town it had once been. The factory that had sustained generations had closed down years ago, leaving families struggling to make ends meet. The streets were quieter now, lined with boarded-up storefronts and weather-worn homes. The community that once thrived together was now fractured, each person too burdened by their own problems to reach out to others. Elijah saw the pain in the town, how people grew colder, more distant. He watched neighbors turn on one another out of frustration and despair. Yet, he didn't stop helping. When the church roof began to leak, Elijah spent every Saturday patching it up, even though he wasn't a regular churchgoer. When the community center ran out of funds to pay for repairs, Elijah showed up with his toolbox and got to work. But instead of gratitude, Elijah often faced whispers and side glances. "Why does he do it?" people murmured. "What does he want out of it?" Others dismissed him outright. "It's just Elijah. He's always been like that. Nothing special." The sting of their words didn't stop Elijah, but they lingered in his heart. He didn't crave recognition, but the weight of being invisible sometimes felt too heavy to bear. The storm approaches. One summer, the skies over Mill Creek turned ominous. Dark clouds rolled in, heavy with rain that seemed to pour endlessly. At first, the townsfolk were merely annoyed, dealing with muddy streets and soaked clothing. But as the weeks went on, the rain intensified, and the river that bordered the town began to swell. Elijah noticed the signs of trouble before most. He spent hours reinforcing sandbags along the riverbanks, hoping to prevent the worst. But when he tried to rally others to help, he was met with shrugs and excuses. "Why should I waste my time? It's not going to flood," one man said. "You're worrying over nothing," said another. But Elijah persisted, even as the water crept higher. Each day he worked alone, his boots sinking into the mud as he dragged heavy sandbags into place. One evening, the sound of rushing water shattered the town's fragile sense of safety. The river had overflowed. The water surged through Mill Creek, sweeping away everything in its path. Homes were swallowed, roads disappeared, and cars were left submerged. Panic spread as families scrambled to save what they could. Amid the chaos, Elijah sprang into action. He turned his old pickup truck into a makeshift rescue vehicle, ferrying families to higher ground. He waded through waist-deep water to pull stranded neighbors from their homes. At the church, which had become an emergency shelter, Elijah brought what supplies he could: blankets, canned food, even a portable stove he'd saved from the flood. He worked tirelessly, coordinating with the overwhelmed authorities to make sure everyone was accounted for. But even then, few people truly noticed him. "Where's the government aid?" someone muttered. "Why isn't anyone helping us?" another demanded. Elijah, soaked to the bone and exhausted, overheard the complaints but said nothing. He didn't help for the praise. He helped because it was the right thing to do. The suspenseful call. Late one night, as the floodwaters continued to rise, a chilling call for help echoed through the storm. A family was trapped in their home, surrounded by rushing water. The current was too strong for the authorities to attempt a rescue, and the town held its breath, helpless to act. Elijah stood in the shelter, his mind racing. He knew the risks, knew that the water could sweep him away. But he also knew that if he didn't go, no one else would. Grabbing a rope and an inflatable raft he had salvaged earlier, Elijah headed out into the storm. The wind howled, and the rain lashed against his face. But he pushed forward, determined to reach the family. As he disappeared into the darkness, those left behind whispered anxiously among themselves. Will he make it? Why is he risking his life for them? For the first time, the townsfolk truly saw Elijah, not just as a quiet man who helped without question, but as someone whose bravery and kindness shone brighter than the storm. The night was pitch black as Elijah Carter waded into the raging floodwaters, clutching a rope in one hand and pulling the inflatable raft behind him. The wind roared like a beast, and the currents threatened to sweep him away with every step. Behind him, the town's residents huddled in the church shelter, whispering anxiously. "No one can survive out there," someone murmured. "But if anyone can, it's Elijah," another replied. For the first time, they truly saw him for what he was, a man whose kindness knew no limits. The rescue. Elijah reached the trapped family's house, which was nearly submerged. A mother, father, and two small children were perched on the roof, clinging to each other in terror as the water lapped at their feet. "It's going to be all right," Elijah called out, his voice cutting through the storm. Using the rope, he secured the raft to a tree and made his way to the house. The current was fierce, pulling at his legs, but he pushed forward. One by one, he ferried the family to safety, wrapping the shivering children in his own coat. But just as he was about to climb into the raft for the final trip back, a massive tree trunk swept down the river and slammed into the side of the house. The impact sent a wave crashing over Elijah, pulling him under. The town holds its breath. Back at the shelter, the townsfolk waited in tense silence. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. When the family arrived, escorted by the authorities who had intercepted them downstream, the room erupted in cheers. But the celebration was short-lived. "Where's Elijah?" the mother asked, her voice trembling. "He didn't come back with us." The mood in the room shifted instantly. Panic rippled through the crowd as they realized the man who had risked everything might still be out there, alone in the dark, battling the flood. The twist. Just when hope seemed lost, the doors to the shelter burst open. There stood Elijah, soaked to the bone, covered in mud, and clutching a small, shivering dog he'd found clinging to a piece of debris. "You didn't think I'd leave anyone behind, did you?" he said with a weary smile. The room erupted into applause, but Elijah didn't bask in it. He handed the dog to a little girl, whose tears turned into a smile, and quietly found a corner to sit down, exhausted but relieved. The morning after, when dawn broke, the rain finally stopped, and the full extent of the flood's devastation became clear. Homes were destroyed, roads were impassable, and the town's spirit was battered. But something had shifted. Inspired by Elijah's bravery, the townsfolk came together like never before. People who had barely spoken to each other in years joined forces to clear debris, rebuild homes, and distribute supplies. "Elijah showed us what it means to care for one another," the mayor said at a town meeting. "It's time we followed his example." The unexpected recognition. A week later, as the town began to recover, Elijah was approached by a man in a suit who introduced himself as a reporter from a national news outlet. "Your story has been spreading," the reporter said. "People across the country are calling you a hero." Elijah frowned, uncomfortable with the attention. "I didn't do anything special. I just did what anyone should do." But the reporter insisted, and soon Elijah's story was published. Donations poured in from across the nation, enough to rebuild not just Mill Creek, but also fund programs to support struggling families. The ultimate twist, as the town celebrated its newfound unity and prosperity, Elijah received an anonymous letter in the mail. It contained a single line: "Your kindness reached me when I needed it most. Now it's my turn." The letter came with a check, a staggering amount of money that would change the town forever. No one knew who sent it, but Elijah had a suspicion. Years ago, he had quietly helped a drifter passing through Mill Creek, giving him a meal and a place to stay for the night. That drifter had mentioned being a former millionaire who had lost everything. "I guess kindness really does come full circle," Elijah said quietly to himself, tucking the letter away. The legacy? Months later, the town unveiled a new park and community center named in Elijah's honor. At the dedication ceremony, Marcus, the young boy Elijah had once mentored, stood before the crowd. Now a confident young man, he spoke with pride. "Elijah taught me that kindness isn't just about helping. It's about believing in the good in people, even when they don't see it themselves," Marcus said. He didn't just save lives during the flood. He gave this town a reason to believe again. The crowd erupted into cheers, but Elijah remained humble. He stayed in the background, quietly watching as the community he had nurtured blossomed into something stronger than he had ever imagined. And though Elijah never sought recognition, Mill Creek never forgot the man who had shown them the true power of kindness.